Hello, everybody, and welcome to our combined History 10 and History 20 session, our live session. A couple of book housekeeping items to take care of that sort of apply to both the History 10 and History classes equally. And then I'll just do a brief overview of sort of where we are in each course and content that we should be diving into right now, and maybe add a little bit more elaboration on a couple of the topics, although we are generally going to use our Wednesday sessions for that. And that should be it today, and I'll just make sure that I reiterate that I'm always available for help. If I'm in a live session, it might take a couple hours for me to get back to you, but I love hearing from students, and I'm always willing to try to work with you to move forward with an assignment or to help clarify a concept, to meet one-on-one if you have any difficulty structuring a response or you want to bounce some ideas off me. I am available, and I always want you to know that this class is a safe place, and if you're comfortable meeting with me in a virtual environment, that's great. And if that's not your cup of tea, I understand that as well. But please do make sure that you're reaching out to me via email or via phone so that I can do my best to help you reach your goals in the courses. So I've got my screen shared right now, and I just made myself some notes because I tend to be the forgetful type of sort of the general housekeeping things that I want to look at today, make sure everybody understands and that we're all on the same page, and that we move into the second half of our courses with some good momentum, and make sure that you are feeling that you can handle what you need to do in your classes, and that things don't back up till to the last week or two, because we know that causes a lot of anxiety for students, and makes it difficult for you to both complete your quarter one classes and also start your quarter two classes. So some of you may know we do have an outcome completion process for students who have a mark of at least 30%, and that's usually intended just to help students hand a few more things in, demonstrate a few more areas of their learning, cross off a few more outcomes on the list, so that all of us, especially you, are comfortable moving into your next level courses in history. And as we know, they are required credits for high school graduation. So we want to make sure that we're all doing our best to help you get those credits, and to keep moving forward with your educational journey. So as I mentioned, we are just about at the halfway mark of the course. We go to the end of the first week of November. So November 5th, I believe, is the turnaround day. I'm not 100% sure that that's actually a school day for you. I suspect it might not be. But obviously your teachers will be scrambling to make sure that you've got marks for everything, and feedback on assignments, and we will be compiling the first quarter report cards. So any of your quarter classes will be finished, and you should have a mark, and hopefully you've got a credit and you're ready to move on to the next part. Although that outcome completion process is available to all students who qualify with the grade of 30% or higher, in general, we really like to avoid that situation. And the reason is that it really impacts the student's ability to get off to a good start in the quarter two classes. If you've still got several assignments or several things you need to do as part of the outcome completion process for your first quarter classes, it's time that is not being spent getting going on your second quarter classes. And that can lead students to fall behind in those second quarter classes. And then if the same thing happens in quarter two, then obviously you're further behind for your third quarter classes, and so on. So if you're missing one or two minor things and you can clean them up relatively quickly, that's kind of a different story. But we really want to encourage you. I mean, your teachers, I'm sure parents, and even your peers want to encourage you to stick to the course calendars, put the time in now while you have it, and make sure you don't leave everything till that last week, because it doesn't typically end up very well for anybody when that happens. Do your best to demonstrate your learning and do a good job on the assignments, and make sure that you're ready to close out the quarter on a strong note, feeling comfortable and proud of yourself, and that you have done what is in your power to make sure that you have completed the class and demonstrated your learning to the fullest extent, and prepared yourself for the next step moving forward. And again, I'm here to help you do that. I'm here to guide you and help facilitate that process. So don't hesitate to reach out for me. If you feel like you're quite a bit behind now, I don't want you to get too over anxious, but it is definitely time if you're, if you're more than 2 weeks behind. Well, if you're more than 1 week behind, it's probably time for some reflection. And I've recommended to a couple students already just to sit down with your parents or guardians and say, hey, listen, this is the situation in the class right now. I'm behind. I need to make a plan and move forward. And just to sit down and sort of let everything else melt away for a second and just think about yourself, your health, your education, and what your priorities are, and then make a plan to get caught up. And if you want some assistance from me in exploring any of the content or setting things up, I'm not going to give you the answers, but I'm certainly going to help point you in the right direction and try to get you continuing to move forward. But you don't want to leave it any later at all. Again, we're almost halfway through the class, so your ability to both stay current with the assignments we're doing now, as well as catch up on things you've missed. It's certainly going to be challenging, and if you leave it any longer, it might be insurmountable. So I don't know what way, a surrender flag or panic anybody too much, but this is definitely the time where you should be having those conversations with your parents and guardians and or peers and making a plan for you to catch up. Don't try to do it all at once. I've had students do nothing and then hand in 6 assignments within a period of 48 hours. And typically the work that's been done on those assignments is not to a very high standard and doesn't do a good job of demonstrating a student's ability or understanding, comprehension, and ability to analyze the information and offer arguments and viewpoints and evidence to support those things. It's just people don't do good work when they try to tackle 20 hours worth of content in 4 hours. So your better approach if you're feeling behind is to try catch up on maybe one assignment every 4 or 5 days or something like that, while staying with the current material, and you'll have better luck, I think, kind of closing the gap and doing so in a way that maximizes your marks and your understanding. So that being said, we'll get on to my sort of housekeeping type notes. I posted a link in the announcements page, and I've mentioned it several times in our live sessions. I just want to mention it one more time here. I do have some flexibility with the way we handle these live sessions. They have not been well attended, and that's for a variety of reasons. We have adult students who are working full-time. We have students who are part-time who are in school classes for certain periods of certain days and literally cannot attend. So we try to make it as flexible as possible. But also it's 3 hours a week, give or take, that we could be 2 to 3 hours a week that we want to maximize the usefulness of. So I'm finding that students are generally not attending. And for those of you who are attending and see any value in this, I appreciate it. I always love to see you. I always love working with students, but I want to make sure that it's working for the most amount of people and that everybody gets what they think they need in order to experience success. So I want your input in that, and that's why I created that survey. And it doesn't have the answers; it's got some ideas, but it's also got places where you have the opportunity to add some ideas of your own or give some opinions on what we do at this time. I want it to work for everybody. There's lots of options up there. Well, not lots, but there's 3 or 4 I think reasonable options up there. And I've had maybe 20%, 25% of students click on that link and fill out that survey. I would really appreciate you doing it. So I'm going to give one more opportunity for students to click on that link, and it won't take you any time at all. It'll take you 20 seconds. Just give me some feedback on what you want to use these sessions for. Primarily this Friday session, so that we can, I can do my best to help meet you where you are and help you in the best way possible. And that link is right here. And as well, I think if I post it in the chat, it doesn't actually link up. Maybe I'll try just to see. But you can see it on the screen. It's also available on the website in the announcements area. So there's multiple places to find it, and if you just can't track it down for whatever reason, just send me an email and I'll shoot it right to you. So I'll give students a couple more days on that, And then we'll make some final decisions about what we're going to do with our live sessions, particularly the Friday one. I think I'd like to keep the 2 separate Wednesday sessions as primarily sort of content driven, focused on the material that we have either just gone over as a review or trying to move forward with the more current stuff. And I know we've all been playing a bit of catch up lately, but hopefully we're starting to find our groove. I'm noticing more assignments are coming in. I'm noticing the assignments. Oftentimes students are utilizing feedback that I've given them on past assignments and improving their work moving forward. And that's what we want to see as teachers. We want everybody starts at a different level, and oftentimes people end at a different level. But I mean, the important thing is wherever you start from, are you improving as you move forward? Do you feel like you're better able to understand not only the events, but why the events happen, and what we can learn from those events, and how the events of an era largely drive the next generation. So I mean, that's history, right? Ideally, we like to understand history, but not just names, dates, and things like that. Although sometimes that's part of it. But more than just listing the facts, what can we learn about the situation, and how can we use that to improve our societies and individuals as citizens moving forward, so that people get to the ideal state. And what the ideal state is often more of a philosophical debate. But I'm sure that most people would agree that in being you in your best world, for most people means that they feel safe. They feel like they have enough access to money, food, security, to ensure that they're not going to healthcare, to things like that are sort of sustaining and related to good health. And I think really most importantly, that people feel happy and protected, and that they feel like they have a purpose, and are in a place and living in a society where they can pursue the things that make them happy, with cooperation and connection to people and community, to continue moving forward, in peace and harmony, comfort, and to experiencing strong physical, mental, and spiritual health. I think that may be a bit generalist, but I think that's what most people want. And we like to we'd like to think that we can learn from things in the past and approaches that have been attempted in the past to move forward in a better manner. So that's the goal, and I like it. It's good to see students moving more from just stating facts and looking at the resources and basically just paraphrasing what's in the resources, moving to more of a model where they use evidence from the learning materials or research of their own. Some people have done a wonderful job of doing research on their own, of using those events and that evidence, and then providing their own rationale, their own reason, their own logic, to explain it in their own words, and to demonstrate that they understand the underlying motivations for things. I mean, sure, World War I happened, and there's lots of dates, and there's lots of people and whatnot, but it's more important that you understand the underlying conditions and the underlying sentiments of nations and leaders, and what were they trying to accomplish, and why were they trying to accomplish, and what can we learn from that? That's definitely the more important part of examining history. And I'm seeing students who maybe started more on the facts and dates, and moving more toward, yes, there's still facts and dates, there's still events, but here's why it's important. And that's great to see. And I want to make sure that everybody, no matter where your starting point is continuing to improve in your ability to communicate those ideas. It's not an English class. It's not a literature or grammar class. And I understand that, but you're going to find that with all of your humanities subjects, the ability to communicate in written form is very important. And everybody comes into high school with different levels of proficiency, with their vocabulary, with their understanding of the mechanics of writing, like punctuation, capitalization, formatting, things like that. And, we know that people start at all different levels. But it's something that everybody can improve, and you're going to find in your humanities courses, there's going to be an expectation that you're going to be able to you're going to be able to make well thought out arguments, and you're going to be able to write them in a way that effectively communicates your main thesis, your main arguments, and backs it up, and does it in a more formal manner. And that's just an important part of learning how to communicate efficiently, not just in class, but as a human being. Some people are stronger than others. Some people improve more than others. Some people, typically those who really enjoy reading, tend to have a better grasp for writing material that flows. So when you read it, you don't feel like you're stopping constantly because you don't understand what they said. Their words are mixed up or it's awkward. And just a couple of things that I like to do. I generally find that people who are what we consider well-read, they just like reading. They enjoy reading. I'm generally a big believer that if you read a lot of material, you just kind of absorb information, or you just kind of absorb techniques that writers use to make things flow and make them easy to read and make it easy to get the point across. And one of the main transitions that I found personally, I think that most students find, particularly if you're thinking about moving into post-secondary education, is that you start out, and teachers often have an expectation that you're going to include, one page or 2 pages, and it seems like, well, that's a lot. I've got to write a lot, and that can be the intimidating part. Whereas as you gradually improve your writing skills and improve your ability to research and improve your ability to pick out the events and reasons and evidence that's important, you're actually going to find that you're going to get to a point, a little later in high school and definitely if you choose to pursue post-secondary, where the challenge is not writing a 10-page paper. The challenge is taking all the information you have and your 20-page paper and paring it down so that it's a good, tight, concise, but meaningful paper. I know it sounds kind of ridiculous when you're younger, but actually is a major issue for a lot of students, and they're not very good at it. They kind of just start rambling to fill space, um, and don't make their points as concise and meaningful as possible. No one wants to read the same point 10 times over. So make your point, back it up with evidence, and then move on to the next point. Now, that being said, you need to provide enough points of evidence to justify the number of marks for the question or what you're expected to demonstrate. But you don't want to keep restating the same thing over and over again. It's not effective. And on the more sort of paragraphy type questions and essays and things like that, you'll notice I try to use those little green check marks. And those green check marks just sort of represent, hey, you made a good point here. That's a good point. So if you see 4 of those check marks or more on a 4-mark question, it means I think that you've supplied a good sort of argument for or answer for the question, and you've also backed it up with 2, 3, 4, however many pieces of evidence and information and other good, well thought out, reasonable, logical arguments, and that you deserve full marks for that question because you've fully demonstrated your learning and you've fully answered the question and you've provided enough evidence. So just make sure that that's your focus. You want things to be tight, but you also want to provide enough information. You don't want to ramble. And with regard to sort of the more formal writing techniques, again, everybody moves down this path at different rates and learns, develops their writing skills at a different rate. But you want to avoid at this point using first-person language, things like it is my opinion that, or I think, or that. Everybody who's reading your paper, teachers, professors, and people in society reading articles or papers, with regard to formal papers where it's more research oriented, they assume that it's your opinion. Why? Because it's your paper. Everything you write in that paper should be your opinion, and you should back it up, unless you are specifically noting that this is somebody else's opinion, and I'm either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it for a specific reason. But in most cases, you want to avoid first person. You want to avoid using I think that, it is my opinion that. Just assume you're right, state your opinion in a manner that just makes it seem like a fact, and then use the rest of your space to justify that and to explore arguments for and against, and ultimately come up with a conclusion that matches your original idea, which is called a thesis. And you should be learning lots about that in English and other courses. And make sure that your conclusion not only applies to your thesis, but that you review that you backed everything up without restating everything, and that you have some sort of move to a general learning that we could take from your paper. And if you keep those things in mind as you're writing a paper, and you make yourself sort of a little skeleton, I'm actually going to put one up. But my wife's an English teacher, and she's got some good sort of templates to help you with more formal writing. And really, it's just first part is introduction and thesis. So you just make little bullet points, just write them down or type them out or whatever. Do I have a strong thesis statement? Do I take a position and do I state it clearly? And do I introduce what I'm talking about in a manner that isn't rambling, but does give the reader some sort of brief overview of the topic at hand, the event, whatever it is that the paper's about. And then, you should have, 2 to 4 body paragraphs, depending on the length or depth of the essay. And then in those paragraphs, you should structure, your 3 or 4 main arguments that support your thesis. And that's where you should use evidence, citing things properly, to make a point that's related to your thesis and to provide some evidence to back it up. Oftentimes, people also have a paragraph that is sort of technically referred to as refuting or a refutal, and that's just here are some existing or typical arguments that go against what I've said, and here's why they're not valid. So if you hear me referring to the word refuting something or a paragraph that refutes an opinion, oftentimes in formal papers, particularly in history, you'll note that there are some arguments that don't work with my thesis, and generally you want to be brief in what those opinions are of other scholars or other people, or sort of generally held opinions, and then again a brief sentence or two as to why that's not valid and my thesis is the best, without using words like I and my thesis and things like that. You state it as if it's fact, you back it up, you try to dissuade commonly existing arguments, you use your body paragraphs as well as you can to include information and evidence on sort of each of the main points. And you should never have, at least in high school, you'll never have more than 3 or 4 main points that support your thesis. Most of us aren't at that level of writing yet. And then your concluding paragraph should essentially restate your thesis using slightly different verbiage, slightly different words, very briefly sum up the arguments. You're not rewriting those 3 body paragraphs again, and then try to make some application moving forward. So that's a good structure for essays. And my wife and I and your other teachers often find that having just a little check sheet template where you can just make little jot notes about what your thesis is and what your main arguments are and how I'm going to conclude this really help you when you go to the writing phase. And after you write, it takes time. There's a revision cycle, which again, you'll probably get a lot of information about in your English classes, but it really, really helps for you to at least do a proofreading of your assignment. Best case, give it to somebody who writes well, maybe is a little older or has experience in the area, or who you just know is a good writer, and have them mark it up and give you some feedback, and then make your revisions and either do that whole process again or submit it. At bare minimum, run your papers through Grammarly. Make sure you do a spell check and a grammar check in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And here's a really big thing. Read your paper out loud. Just find a quiet place and read it out loud. Sometimes when you're typing and you're kind of doing stream of thought or stream of consciousness writing, just writing what I know and what's in my head and whatnot, it doesn't read very well. It doesn't flow very nicely. And if you read it out loud to yourself, sometimes people even record it, you're going to find those phrases that maybe don't make sense or are really awkward or are rambling and run on. It's a lot easier to pick those things out when you're reading it aloud as opposed to when you're reading it in your head, because you'll oftentimes read it a lot quicker when you're reading it in your head, whereas if you take time to read it out loud, you're moving at a slower pace and you're just much more able to pick out those awkward phrases and things that run on sentences and sentences that just don't make sense or would confuse the reader. So at bare minimum, if you're not going to do the full revision process, run it through Grammarly, do a grammar and spell check inside the software you're using, and read it out loud once, making some changes before you hand it in. Trust me, it'll make a big difference in your ability to communicate effectively and through your papers. So that stuff is important. I've had some problems with people copying and pasting information. I try to be very clear that I want you to use the references from our class materials and research of your own to support your opinions, but that does not mean you copy and paste. Even if you include the quotes and give it proper attribution, that shouldn't be the only part of your answer. The idea is to use the evidence that you have to support your own individual thoughts. And your thoughts may well coincide with other thoughts and other theses. And I mean, history, everybody, there's so much that's been written about history and events and whatnot. Your views and your writing is bound to have similar ideas as someone else, but it should be your own interpretation of the events, of the underlying causes and whatnot. And you should back that up with research, and you need to show me where you got that research. If you're using a direct quote, that's fine. Just make sure you include quote marks, and make sure you let me know where you got it from. That's perfectly acceptable, but it shouldn't be your primary answer. You should not be copying and pasting things and putting it in there and saying, that's the answer. I did the research and here's the answer. Generally, I want you to expand upon that. If the question lends itself to just typing out the answer as it would appear on a website, for instance, if I asked you for a specific date, or in one of our last assignments in History 10, I asked for a list of five commodities that would have been either exploited or traded for or whatnot by imperial empires in Europe from their colonies overseas. Well, if I'm looking for a list of 5 things, it's fine just to type out the 5 things. You don't need to explain that sort of things. You don't generally need to cite commonly known facts, but if it's something that's got sort of an opinion or a description attached to it in the writing or in the research that you found, you should put quotes around it and then use it as part of your argument, not just directly restating what they said. So paraphrasing things means basically read something and you draw from it, but you're still creating your own ideas. And if there's a direct quote or something that you need to support your idea, then that's when you definitely need to be using using quote marks and doing citations and showing me where you got it. Picking out things that are copied and pasted and plagiarized, I'll be perfectly honest with you, it's pretty easy. We have some software built right into our marking software on Blackboard that gives us a report saying how original your material is, and if it has a score that's low, like 20%, to 0 to 20% or something like that, I could be pretty confident that what you've typed in that report and what's been handed in is generally your own thoughts. And oftentimes people include the questions inside their responses, so it'll pick that up as something that's copied and pasted. But of course, I wouldn't consider that copy paste, as that's just putting the question on the paper. But when I start seeing originality report scores that are 70, 80%, then it's pretty clear just from the software that you have basically copied and pasted other people's ideas from other sources. Now, if you've done a direct quote and you've cited it properly, that's not an issue as long as you've used your own thoughts in addition to that quote. But it's generally pretty easy for me to see, okay, they copied and pasted this from that website and from that website and this from that website. So the software makes that pretty easy, but also your teachers are generally pretty in tune with the level of writing for a grade 10 student or a grade 11 or a grade 12 student. And when we see something in a paper that looks like it was written by a PhD scholar, we're usually pretty good at picking that out and saying, oh man, there's no way that's a grade 10 student writing. And then a quick Google search will usually show us where they lifted those ideas from. Some of you are wonderful writers at this point, and I've seen some work in both the History 10 class where it's original and it's extremely well written, and oftentimes papers that I would have been impressed with even at a university level, and that's just fantastic. I love to see students who just take such pride in their writing and pride in their ability to think critically and express themselves. And again, everybody's at a different level, but it has been really wonderful to read some of the original reports and thoughts and papers that are just written at a level that I wouldn't expect at this juncture of high school. So for those of you who've given that feedback to, I mean, just pat yourself on the back. That's great. For those of you who are struggling a bit with it, just continue to improve. That's the best we can hope for. Use feedback. Use the advice your teachers are giving you to continually improve, and that's advancement. Okay, that's showing that you are dedicated to yourself and that you are taking steps that you need to take in order to meet goals, whether they be in this class or in your high school years or in life in general and what happens after high school. So that's a bit of a diatribe on paraphrasing, plagiarism, and writing effective reports. So moving on to the next point here, importance of reading the questions and assignment instructions carefully. Look at the rubrics. Not everything has a rubric. I'm doing my best. Remember, this isn't my course. I kind of inherited. So I'm doing my best to move forward and sort of clarify things where I can in the assignment to make sure I've got rubrics so you know what you're being graded on, and those should all be public. So please do read the assignment instructions carefully. Please do look at how many marks are assigned for each question and base your response on that. If I give you a question that's 4 marks, there's a reasonable expectation there that you're going to have sort of one central idea, and then you're going to have 2 or 3 points of evidence from your readings in the class or from your own research that back up that main point, so that you can, you've given me and yourself 4 valuable points or pieces of evidence or something that can justify the 4 marks for the question. If you've got, like a 1-sentence response for a 4-mark question, clearly you're not including 4 ideas. You might have listed 4 things in it, but there aren't going to be 4 good pieces of evidence or good points. So please do read the assignments carefully. And if you have questions about, is this, what are you looking for, how to structure a response or whatnot, and the rubric or the assignment instructions are not making sense to you or you're struggling with them, again, that's a point where you just email me and we'll work through those things. So I want you to do your best to demonstrate your ability to think critically and your ability to comprehend what it is that you're reading and what you're learning. And in order to do that, you kind of have to treat me like an idiot and give me enough evidence that would convince somebody who doesn't know anything about this topic, whatever it is. Resubmitting assignments is part of the revision process. I brought that up last week, this week in our live sessions. And I think I've gone through all the assignments in History 10, not the quizzes, but the assignments and reports and essays and stuff in History 10 and History 20. And I think I've made it so that you can resubmit in all of those assignments. So if you've gotten feedback on an assignment and you are willing to go back and use that feedback or sort of put a better effort in if you feel like you didn't maybe give it enough time or effort the first time, I'm willing to accept resubmissions and to change your grade based on those resubmissions. You will get less feedback, certainly, on the resubmissions. I've already given you feedback, and we could go back and forth forever, but I give you some feedback. Try to use that feedback and your own analysis and make an improved product, hand it in, and I will do my best to regrade those and add to your mark if I think it's warranted based on how you've used the feedback to refine your work. So for the vast majority of assignments, if you choose to do that, it's available. Go ahead and resubmit it, but save yourself time and energy by doing a good job as you can the first time around, because the feedback I give you is not going to give you the answer. It's just going to point out areas where you could elaborate or things you need to improve or so maybe some ideas or facts are mixed up and things like that. So do a good job the first time. Don't expect that you can just hand in something that's really sloppy and Dunbar is going to give you all the answers. I won't do that, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to use the more general feedback to improve your paper. And if you're willing to do that, and you're willing to go back, and you're willing to put the effort into to refining things like that and hand it in, I'm certainly willing to go through the effort of reassessing it and reading it again and saying, yep, they made significant improvements here, and then increasing the grade accordingly. They will probably get sort of pushed to the end of the marking pile because I always want to make sure that I'm trying to be as current as possible with the work that's being handed in as per the assignment calendar. So that should be available. If you run into an assignment where you're having trouble resubmitting it, any technical difficulties, just email me, we'll work through them. You should be able to resubmit the exact same way you submitted the first time. So if you go back to the assignment, you should still have at the bottom the opportunity to browse and attach files and submit it. It should look exactly the same. The only difference is on your end and on my end in the my grades area and in the marking area, it shows that there's 2 attempts and that the first one got this mark and feedback, and the second one got this mark and feedback. So it's really well organized. Make sure you're handing things in a file. I've given this feedback to certain students several times, and it just needs to be done. When you hand in a Word doc or Google Doc or a PDF or something like that, I'm able to take it and I'm able to give you targeted feedback right on the paper with comments and blah, blah, blah. When you type your answers into the right submission box, you can't format it properly. I can't go in there and highlight things and give you specific feedback, and it's not going to work. So if you've been doing that, you need to stop doing that, and you need to be handing in an actual file. That is an expectation. And if you are having any trouble doing that, you let me know and I will help you. You all have access to the full Office suite, which includes Microsoft Word and Excel and things, PowerPoint, things like that. You also have access to Google Docs and slides and Google Sheets and things. So you have access to the ability to make documents and submit them. So please do that if you have not been doing that. Next up, progress reports. So I send out progress reports every 2 weeks or so, and we're coming up on that again. So it's probably Monday. You and your parents and guardians will get another PDF report card, which shows all the assignments that have been due up to date, your marks on all those assignments, and your approximate total grade for the class so far. So expect those to come out. And if you haven't been receiving, or if you didn't receive the last one, or if your parents or guardians didn't receive the last one, and there's some sort of issue with the email address that you registered with, just let me know. We can update that easily enough, but you should be expecting those. Parent-teacher interviews are next week. We're not doing interviews in the school. All of our interviews are going to be done online via Zoom or some sort of online software, or by phone call, depending on what parents and guardians want. I will not be reaching out to, it's not an expectation this year. We decided we're not going to reach out to all parents. We're going to try to target parents and guardians of students who have fallen behind or are struggling with material. Again, the mark is low and there's maybe danger of the student not earning a credit. We're going to focus on those. So if your parents, guardians do not receive sort of a formal invite to talk, that probably means that you're doing fine in class. If your parents or guardians wish to talk, perfectly fine. Let them know they can email me or call me, and I'd be happy to do interviews. But we're going to focus as teachers. We're going to focus our interview efforts with students who maybe need some more assistance. And so that's the way that's going to work. There's going to be a sign-up calendar for your parents, guardians. I'll send out an email link, and maybe I'll try to follow up by phone. But this is the part of the quarter that we're going to do those interviews. We're pretty much right at the halfway point. Okay, as usual, I've talked a lot, but I think we've covered a lot of ground. Are there any questions so far? And if you're watching this as a live session recording from the website, just email me or call. Already got feedback in the chat area that there are no pressing questions right now, so I'm going to quickly move on, and I'll just spend maybe 5 minutes on 5-10 minutes on History 10 and History 20. Just general review. This is more the content oriented stuff, which typically we'll do more in our Wednesday sessions. But I'll just do a quick review here. One more thing I wanted to mention with the progress reports and whatnot. I had a whole lot of students hand in a whole lot of material, overdue, late material in the last 3 days, and I've been busting my butt to try and get all of that graded. I think I've got everything graded up until yesterday, with the exception of the Medici final projects, Medici or Renaissance option 1, option 2 for History 10 is what I'm talking about. Those require a little bit more time and effort and analysis on my end. My hope is to get to those after this live session and this afternoon, so that everything up until our current scheduled due dates, all of those assignments and reports will be completed. You'll have your feedback. The marks are in the My Grades area, so you can have a look at that. EDSB for students and parents will be coming live relatively quickly, so that'll be another opportunity for parents and guardians to go and look at marks and assignments and due dates anytime they want. They'll have access to that. You already have access to all that through Blackboard, and perhaps your parent guardian has asked you to show them due dates, show them assignment marks and things like that. And that's perfectly acceptable as well. But parents will be getting direct access to that information in the coming couple of weeks. So anyway, you should have a reasonably accurate midterm mark based on everything you've handed in up to today, yesterday or last night. And I'll continue to try to stay as current as I can and give you good feedback. I've been including a lot of feedback on assignments, sometimes maybe a bit too much, but I always want to let students know that this is an area where I think you could use a little bit more analysis, or have you thought about this, or this is a different way to phrase it. Hope to try not to get overwhelmed by the amount of feedback. Just use what you think you can use to help improve yourself, and everybody's goals are different, so that might look different for everybody. Okay, sorry, History 20s. I'm gonna go with History 10 here for 5 to 7 minutes. Where we are right now is we should be working in Unit 4. Some people have already handed in the assignment for 4.1. That was great to see. And so most of the assignments that we've been working on post Renaissance have been smaller for now, more go to the materials, demonstrate that you understand the concept, give a couple pieces of evidence, and move on. And sort of 3, 4, 5 mark question, 10 mark assignments, and those have been coming in, and some are better than others, but generally the people that have been handing them in on time have been doing a really good job of explaining the concept and also giving enough evidence that they could justify getting full marks to the question. And so continue to do that. If you're not in Unit 4, you're probably a bit behind. Again, you should probably sit down and go over your goals and decide how you're gonna proceed. We're mostly talking about commerce and trade and the sort of effects of imperialism and colonialism. We have gone over in reasonable depth. God, God, Gold, and Glory, and the ideas that opened up imperialist opportunities for mostly Western European countries, whereby they have the means to travel. They may have approached indigenous populations with promises of trade, protection from other nations and our enemies, partnerships, and whether or not the underlying principles and the underlying intents of these imperial nations were positive. In general, we know that they usually ended up in disease, exploitation of the resources and of the people, the slavery, removing people from their home country to sell them as slaves in other areas controlled by those imperial powers, and in general, with regard to religion, the use of a religion as a means of subjugating people, converting them, and essentially adding them as loyal subjects of a certain nation, which means they could be used to, for military purposes. They could be used to help refine or mine or produce resources or whatever, whether that be through enslavement or pitifully low wages and support from those colonial nations. So whatever the reasons for colonizing, we know that they generally ended up very poorly for the indigenous populations, whether you're talking about indigenous populations from Northern America, the Plains indigenous people, Northern indigenous people, Inuit populations, and then all the way down through the Americas and into Central America and South America, their indigenous populations too. A lot of the initial contact and I'll put in quotes, partnerships and whatnot were done by the Iberian countries, by Portugal and Spain. But as soon as there was some evidence that colonializing parts of Africa and the Americas was profitable, everybody jumped on board and was definitely doing their best to establish colonies outside of their home nation, and thus improve the wealth, the power, the reach of the particular nation. Some were better than others at it. Some were worse, but in general, it benefited the nations that were colonizers, and it did a lot of destructive work in the indigenous populations of the areas that they subjugated. So in Europe right now, there's definitely with more commerce and more trade and more materials coming in from other places and advances in technology and farming. Most of these nations have gone from what was what we consider a subsistence economy, enough food to feed your peasants and then pass goods and money and whatnot up the chain to the king, but not a whole lot extra. Now we're entering a period of time where, with all these resources and all these colonies and all these new goods that we never had access to before, there's more opportunity for wealth in the country, and there's lots of opportunity for trade because there's well-established trade routes now, either overseas or through the mountains or wherever you could travel. Because you have access to those markets, you can now get things you could never get before. You can also trade the things that you can mine, farm, produce, and that your colonies can mine, farm, and produce. You could trade those and sell those to other nations. So there's a lot of wealth coming into a lot of nations in Europe right now, and it's changing society. And just like it does today, I think you can look down in the States, and you can look in Canada, and you're going to see that the gap between the wealthy and the poor is rising every generation. And that leads to a lot of different things, which we're going to talk about: revolution and unrest, and people rising up against against people who are in power. And this widening gap is really driving that. The countries are getting wealthier, and although the lives of the peasants and the people who are sort of the lower middle class and below are improving, they're not improving nearly to the extent that the wealthy above them are improving. And as that gap grows, the wealthier get wealthier, and they tend to be able to oppress even more and get even wealthier and wealthier. And at some point, you just ask, how much is enough wealth? How many $100 billion do you need before you feel like you've reached your goals? And when that sort of idea is pervasive in the people that already have the power, it just makes it easier. It makes it easier for them to make more money, to oppress more people, and that oppression causes a decrease in the quality of life for people underneath them. And it's just a perpetuating cycle. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and sooner or later, the lower classes during this period of time. This is post-Renaissance, age of conquest, 16, 1700s. You keep pushing people long enough, sooner or later they're going to push back, and this is how revolts and revolutions happen. Common people didn't typically have the ability to amass their power and use it to attack people above them for equality or for better distribution of wealth and goods. This is a period of time where that is actually starting to happen and people are starting to organize. So we're going to look at how this gap between wealthy and poor and the wealth of nations and things like that is going to drive politics and society for the next many hundred years to today even. So that's going to be a big part of what we're talking about now in History 10. I'm going to move on to, for the specifics, again, make sure you're reading the class materials, make sure you're doing your own research, make sure that you are understanding the concepts that are presented, and then bring those questions to the live sessions, email me those questions, and they're things that we can discuss. History 20, again, I'll just do a sort of little 5 to 7 minutes here on where we are, where we should be. Still getting in lots of papers and assignments, a little bit more so in this last week than before. So hopefully students are indeed realizing, wow, we're halfway through the semester. I got to get things in. And again, please don't just throw things in. Do a good job on them, even if it means you're catching up maybe at a slightly slower rate. I'd rather read good stuff than a whole bunch of bad stuff, and your marks will reflect that. Make a reasonable expectation for yourself to make up for missing work. Don't try to do it all at once. It never works out well for anybody, but particularly you, who's the one we really care about here. So here's where we are. I just want to make a quick clarification on Wilson and the 14 points, the League of Nations. This is the end of World War I. Treaty of Versailles. I think maybe the last session I made it. Nobody said anything, but I think upon reflection, I think I may have given the impression that Wilson brought in these 14 points, and the League of Nations made these points that were going to govern the way that Germany is treated and the way that Western Europe is in the coming years to prevent war from happening again. And I think I maybe gave the idea that Wilson was really oppressive and that he really wanted to punish Germany and punish Austria-Hungary for the war. And that was actually kind of opposite as to what he really wanted. Wilson, being distant, across the ocean in America, and they did have a significant impact on World War I, but they didn't have nearly the level of destruction with regard to troop casualties and essentially zero casualties and zero rebuilding to do on the American front because America wasn't attacked, their landmass wasn't attacked. They weren't experiencing the post-war down period that most of the other nations were. Britain, they were somewhat distant from their lands, were somewhat distant from the conflict, the on-the-ground conflict as well. But for areas, like in France and in Germany and in Austria-Hungary and on the eastern coast or the western coast or western territory of Russia and down into those Slavic nations that Serbia and Montenegro and Bosnia-Herzegovina, there was a lot of destruction in those areas. So those people are dealing with both the fact that they've lost a lot of human beings, lost a lot of human lives in the fighting, but also that, houses and villages were burned and entire, cities were wiped down. So basically they're digging themselves out of the rubble. They don't have money because the nations have basically spent it all on the wartime efforts. and they have fewer people to do it because, over 10 million people died, 20 million people were, injured to various degrees. It's a lot of people that they formerly used to commit to or contribute to your economy. So they're really in a bad position. It's post-war rebuilding. The argument is continually made. Did anybody win anything? Was it a necessary war? If you believe it was, you probably got your reasons for it. If you believe it wasn't, you've got your reasons for it, and you can make a reasonable argument either way, I think. But at the end of the day, it's certainly clear that every nation suffered losses, and the losses within France and within Germany and Belgium and those areas that were really part of the land conflict, those losses were severe. And so Europe was not in a good state right now. And a lot of them were, there's very, very strong anti-German sentiments. I mean, Britain, there was a very strong anti-sentiment in Britain. It went away a little quicker, I think, in others. Obviously, in France and Russia, very, very, very strong anti-German sentiment for a while. Even Italy, who would later become an ally of Germany. Germany was generally blamed for the war, fairly or unfairly, and more so in those European land masses than coming from, say, America. So Wilson was actually more or so against severe reparations. That's Germany paying back money for their role in the war and giving it to the nations that they did a lot of damage in. Wilson was actually more against that. He wanted to have a peace, no winners, no losers listed. We'll do what we need to do to have peace. And here's some things we need to do moving forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And yes, some of those really limited Germany and what it could do in the territories that it could have and what it lost and whatnot. But it wasn't. Wilson's view wasn't to make it really punishing, to make it really punitive. Definitely more so in other nations. And so I just wanted to clarify that. The really punitive measures against Germany were more so from the European nations. Wilson wasn't a big fan of punishment, but certainly some of the other nations, France and Britain and Russia wasn't invited to the table. They were having their own revolution at the time, but they were more on the punitive end, and it can be very successfully argued that all of this punishment to Germany pushed the people too far and then led to the opportunity for Hitler and National Socialists and totalitarian fascist governments to take over in Europe. So it looks like I've used my time here. We'll get a bit more into the rise of those sentiments in Italy's that were really affected by the war. Italy with Il Duce, Benito Mussolini and the rise of fascism, Germany, the rise of Hitler and Nazism, and in Russia, revolution, Lenin, Marxism, Marxist-Leninism as a political ideology, the first really widely implemented attempt at communism in a nation, and the events and how these political ideologies led to World War II, and more of a looking at genocide as a somewhat legitimized war tactic, and how it had happened many times in the past, where entire groups of people were essentially wiped out. But now we're in an age where information travels faster and it becomes more public, and how that may have affected the war. So thank you again for your time. And as always, I'm here to help. So send me an email if you have any questions, and have a good weekend. Hey, thanks for sticking around. No, I appreciate it. I got to run because I got another teacher who needs to use this area. But if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay, bud. Have a nice weekend.